Welcome to CURES, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness. I'm Kara Sundlund. So how can you improve your brain fitness in 2022? It's so much more than just how we fit in jeans, right? So what can you do to reduce brain fog and your risk of dementia later on? Kristen Cusato from the Alzheimer's Association is here now with the top 5 things that we should be adding to brain fitness. Welcome, Kristen. People might not even think of brain fitness, right?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kara, for having me. I appreciate it. People think about fitness, but there's a lot of things you can do to help your brain as well. It's not just about getting to the gym.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I think, have this scary thing about dementia or Alzheimer's, like, oh my gosh, I hope I don't ever have that, but we all know someone in our family who has, and they feel sort of hopeless and like, well, who knows? But research is showing there are ways we can really improve brain fitness and reduce our chances of ever having dementia. You have a few ways to tell us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I said it's more than going to the gym, but absolutely going to the gym is one of the things, or getting out there and exercising, getting that blood pumping. And, for years we were talking about and still talk about the fact that exercise is good for your heart. But we at the Alzheimer's Association are always saying what's good for your heart is actually good for the brain, continuing that blood flow. And it sounds pretty simple, right? But there's more and more evidence coming out and more studies about how important this is. For example, there was a study just last fall that talked about when you exercise, there's a hormone that's produced by the muscles that can actually protect your brain cells. So who knew, right, that that's a combination and that one thing affects the other, but it's definitely something to do to add to your repertoire is getting out there. It's winter, it's hard to get out there. We understand, do something at home or try to bundle up and take a walk.
Well, and that's the thing, you said walk. Is there any kind of exercise that's better, or just the idea that we move every day is really what's important at any level?
It's a little more than a stroll, right? So a brisk walk, get that heart pumping. Some say if you're walking and you're able to talk, you're not walking fast enough. I think you can still be able to talk, but just get that heart pumping more than your normal stroll around if we were to go to a store or the mall or something.
Okay. So that's one of the ways, exercise. And then eating right matters too, but more than just, okay, I'm eating healthy. There's actually a mind diet that you want people to be aware of.
Yeah, the Mind and the Mediterranean diet also has been used for years talking about heart health, right, and cardio health. But there's studies that are coming up talking about how important this is as well, especially dealing with the fact that we now know that changes in your brain can be occurring 15 to 20 years before any symptoms of dementia happen. So wouldn't it be great if we could act on these things now and kind of, again, protect those brain cells before we get to the point where something would happen? So we're talking about the Mind diet, and we're talking about fruits and vegetables, but also those good fats, the fats of the olive oils and the avocados, which I love. Thank goodness I love those, right? And nuts, and not as much red meat, and really moderate alcohol use. There's all sorts of stuff that comes out about alcohol and dementia and, prescription drugs and different things that, are not familiar to your body. So really doing that, taking a look at those kinds of things. Look up the Mind diet. It's kind of interesting, and you should be able to incorporate some of that into your daily routine when you eat.
Right. Okay. So, and just I want to refer people, because if you're watching CURES right now, we actually did a whole CURES on the Mediterranean diet, specifically the detox diet with Dr. Artemis Morris. And just having lots of good quality olive oil is anti-inflammatory, good quality fishes. But if you want to learn more about that, I just want to refer people to that as well. And what about, you've done studies like even right here in Connecticut about just things that are making a difference. What else can we do to be fit in our brain?
Yeah, let's talk about mental health, definitely, for studies that we're doing here in Connecticut. We at the Alzheimer's Association are funding a study up at UConn Health, a Dr. Kevin Manning, who's doing an imaging study on apathy or depression and dementia, right? So what does that do? Does it add to it? And it's so hard right now, during COVID and social isolation. And it was so hard for all the folks who were in facilities when people couldn't see them, and so many loved ones had to see them through the glass, et cetera. So anything you can do to kind of lift your mood, right? Mental health is so crucial. Social cognitive engagement is so incredibly crucial. Talk about talk about whatever you need to talk about with someone. Get therapy if that's something that you feel comfortable doing. There's nothing wrong with, take the stigma away, right, from trying to worry about your mental health, which I'm sure you've done a ton of. We've done a ton of stories on that, right?
Right,
It's
right.
just
And
so
that is
crucial
important.
to.
People can get the therapy and now it's really, that's maybe a silver lining of the pandemic. The access to mental health is much easier now with all of the telehealth. We're finding that people are keeping their appointments more, or maybe even just choosing to actually get a therapist. A lot of companies are offering free sessions, at least 3 free sessions.
It's important, and support groups of any kind, and we at the Alzheimer's Association, of course, offer support groups for caregivers, because there are 80,000 people living with Alzheimer's in Connecticut and twice as many caregivers, and it's really stressful. All the different aspects, all the different phases of caring for your loved one. It's really stressful, so taking care of your own mental health is really important as well.
So staying socially active, loneliness is actually a risk factor for dementia?
Yeah. Worrying about people who are alone a lot, who are not socially engaged, who are just watching the television all the time. I'm not even talking about people who have the disease, but early on when you're diagnosed, we're always suggesting that you continue with that social and cognitive engagement. And we have a lot of great early stage programs that we're doing all virtual now, so people can do museum programs and art and different things like that, music bingo, different things to kind of keep your mind engaged. We suggest you do that now as well. Like, it's so important to continue to do that, whatever time it is, and changing up your routines, doing something that's going to challenge your brain. If there's a new word game, what is the new word game that's out there? Wordle or something that everyone is doing on social media. Pick up a new word game, go a different way to work, try learn a language. There are a lot of studies that talk about this thing called cognitive reserve. So if you pick up something, an additional hobby or an additional language, some additional education, even like another degree or something, you could have this cognitive reserve that could help you stabilize if dementia, comes into your life. So that's interesting as well.
Interesting. Okay, so making sure you're staying engaged. What about just reading books?
Reading books is important. It's very important to do that, to be able to focus. Reading books, playing games, learning a new game. Again, not the same game you've been doing all over and over again. And I heard something interesting that somebody said about crossword puzzles is just going to refer you to words you already know. So maybe going, expanding, and learning about something you don't know, a different word, something scientific. There's all sorts of interesting science, to read about now. So, expand your brain, go in a direction, go out of the box, go in a direction you weren't going before, to try to learn brand new things.
And it's exciting because we've learned so much more about neuroplasticity, that our brain is really a lot more like Play-Doh than it is fixed, even when it comes to IQ or changing things. So having that growth mindset at any age, that you can still heal your brain, challenge your brain, create more gray matter. I mean, doing all that as we get into 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s is hugely important.
Right. And most of the folks who have Alzheimer's are diagnosed, other forms of dementia care are diagnosed over the age of 65, right? But there are a lot of people who are here with this younger onset, which is below 65, right? My mom was diagnosed at 61. I know folks who are diagnosed in their late 40s or 50s. So it's definitely something that people of all ages should really worry about, to make sure you start caring for your brain as early as possible.
Well, and, people who are, say, just in their 40s and they're taking care of kids and they're stressed out and they're working all the time, you're saying that the studies are showing that the changes in the brain might happen 20 years before anything is diagnosed?
Correct. Right. So, and that's we're finding out that because of the PET scans, right? These scans that we can actually see something. The hallmarks of Alzheimer's include amyloid and tau. So amyloid is this protein that kind of hangs out in the way of synapses talking to each other. And tau is actually in a brain cell and actually kills the brain cell. So those things can be popping around there and hanging out in your brain way before the symptoms occur. So, and they can see them now on these PET scans, on these images. So seeing that earlier is like, wow, before it comes out and actually ends up turning into, wow, I can't remember my way home, or I'm repeating the same story 5 times, or I'm not figuring out how to make a pot of coffee because it's too many steps to process. Wouldn't it be great if we could do those things kind of preemptively versus reactively when someone has a diagnosis, which is sometimes, too late.
Yeah. And what about if you're starting to notice some changes. Is there any definitive test? You mentioned these scans. Like, can you ask your doctor to scan your brain, or what types of testing can you do?
So the first thing you should do is get educated, right? So definitely go onto our website, which is alz.org, and look up what the 10 signs are, the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's, or take a class. We have a lot of free education classes that we give now virtually, all across the state, all different times, now virtually from one place, your computer, but all different times of the day. And this is what we should learn about. What are the definitive things? Because there are big differences between normal aging and signs of Alzheimer's, right? So we need really learn what that is to be able to watch your loved one and figure that out. Look for real changes in behavior. An example is my mom was a to the penny checkbook person years ago, before we would do everything, send it automatically or automatic withdrawals, and she would write it out and it'd be perfect. And then she was making all these math mistakes, and she was kind of ripping up checks and saying, I'm not going to send this one. I'm like, well, that's not how you don't send it, is rip it up anymore, right? So it's changes in behavior, something that was really easy for them to do, or getting lost coming home from the grocery store when you've been going to that grocery store for 10 years, things like that. So there's a lot of, forgetting a recipe, there's a lot of things to learn about what are the signs to look for. So I would say educate yourself and kind of start taking notes about your person and what's going on. And also go to your general physician or your primary care to get a workup first, because all these things we're telling you, there could be things that mimic dementia. So there could be, and one of them is actually depression. Depression can give you this brain fog, and they're also looking at COVID long-term, continuing with brain fog. So if somebody's had COVID, for example, B12 deficiency, medication mix-up. If you've had anesthesia recently, there are a lot of things that can mimic. So make sure you get your blood work all set first to make sure it's not something else. And then they probably would refer you to a neurologist. But definitely get educated. And then there may be an MRI or a PET scan that they may do. But, we're also talking about getting people involved in clinical trials early. And there's a lot going on now. We just had our first medication approved for early stages of the disease last June. Semi-controversial because it's very, very expensive. You guys did stories on this, and it's not covered. But the good news is there are 3 to 4 other drugs in the pipeline for people with the early stages of the disease that are right up on it and the FDA. So the next 2 to 3 years, we could have even more drugs that what they do is they bind to that amyloid I was talking about in the brain. And it's kind of reducing some of those plaques and essentially giving people more time. It's not a cure, but it's a medication that you could do early on that could give some families more time.
Right. And there's some startling statistic. I'm sure you'll know it and I can't remember, but like people over the age of 75 or over the age of 80, it's a huge percentage that get diagnosed with dementia.
People over the age of 85, 1 in 3 die of dementia.
Wow.
So
okay.
It's pretty.
So basically, if you live long
awful.
enough, a lot of times people say if you live long enough, then you're going to perhaps have this. And it may just be, we call it senior moments, we call it this, but it can be much more serious. And what we're learning about is that you can change things. What about supplements? I know I've done a lot of stories here with our naturopaths, the importance of good fish oils, the importance of anything that brings down inflammation, like the Mediterranean diet. Anything that you recommend for people when they're talking about supplementation?
Well, here's something very interesting. I'm glad you asked me that because I looked up this interesting study about supplements. No supplements are FDA approved, right? So we don't talk about suggesting go take that because a lot of people get hooked and they get taken for money that they shouldn't be spending on. I just spent $120 on the supplements promised to give me my brain memories back. Well, that's not going to happen. Okay. So there are no supplements right now that are approved, but there is a study that just came out as a smaller study. It was called the Cosmos Mind study. And it was initially looking at cardio health, people who took a cocoa supplement plus a multivitamin. So they're looking at these folks with cardio health. They watched them for 3 years and they actually had, you look at something and then there's like a different effect, 60% slowing of cognitive decline.
Wow.
60% slowing of cognitive decline for this cocoa plus daily multivitamin, right? And this is a small study. And the good thing about small studies is, well, when they have positive answers and great data, they apply for a bigger study. And then you can invite, have thousands and thousands of people involved in the next study to get more information. Also, it needs to be more diverse, which is another thing, having folks with diversity getting involved in clinical trials. That's a whole other story we could get into. But we definitely, they're definitely starting to look at that. Look at what is it that we can do again now, taking a multivitamin for X number of years? Can this change the course of this disease, which is, of course, what we all want?
Now, I know from my multiple interviews with naturopaths, they'll say absolutely we should all be taking a multivitamin, even though they're not.
Yeah.
A lot of times the money isn't there to do these wide-scale studies, but there is plenty of science. So just from the naturopathic perspective, they'll say we all need a multivitamin, we all need a good fish oil, vitamin D, and a probiotic. Those are like their foundational four. So just throw that out. You can watch a different CURES, take your own opinion on this. But food is also medicine. So again, looking at that mind diet, reducing some of the processed foods and sugars that cause so much inflammation. So there are things that people can do to really live a healthy lifestyle and not feel so hopeless that, oh, well, who knows if you get Alzheimer's. It's always felt so random. And I guess what you're saying is a lot of studies are showing we do have more power than we think.
Correct. We absolutely do. And sleep too. We talk about how the importance of sleep, and sleep is when your mind doesn't work and doesn't go. How can that be good for you? Well, it's actually clearing out those toxins and maybe clearing out some of the amyloid mess that's happening in your brain, right? So this restorative sleep, the deep sleep is really, really important. Getting up every hour, not so good, But then there was a big study that came out a couple of years ago talking about if you take too many sleep aids, how that'll be negative. So you really got to balance it out. Do the best you can to try to get some really good sleep. And there are all sorts of helpful hints on how to have a really good sleep, and the blackout curtains, and keep the phone in the living room and that kind of stuff. But there's definitely more study on sleep as well. So let me just mention really quickly, there's a study called the US Pointer Study, which is going on across the country. And this is looking at lifestyle. It's looking at exercise, cognitive social stimulation, the certain kinds of diet, including the mind diet, and looking at these folks for 2 years and seeing if that works. That study is so of interest to the National Institutes of Health and National Institutes of Aging. They put a bunch of money in for all these ancillary studies, which are, guess what, about your gut, about sleep. So all these things, your immune system. So they're looking at all of these things in addition. So I think we're on a really good time for research. We're on the cusp of a lot of information, and there's more than $2 million of research being funded right here in Connecticut. So there's a lot of good stuff going on, and that's why we're so appreciative when people do our Walks to End Alzheimer's on our longest day and donate, because a lot of that money not only goes to help us do free classes, but also goes to research where we need to get closer to new treatments and a cure.
Yep. And we want to let everyone know that, actually, before I give the phone number, just real quick, we talked about how can stress affect it? And are we looking at that, I've done studies with people stories with people like Deepak Chopra who say even after one meditation, we can create more gray matter. So what about research with meditation and mindfulness? Can that help prevent dementia?
I think there are some studies about that, definitely to take your deep breath and do your yoga and do your stuff to calm down. I think to kind of I think because when you get into this heightened state, right, it's this inflammation, right, of your brain and your heart, everything. And just to kind of calm that down and calm those responses, there's all sorts of ways to learn about that. And I think that's definitely part of the future as well. And people, that yoga, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting involved in that crazy hocus pocus stuff. It's not. It's just moving and breathing, and being mindful, as you mentioned. And those things are medicine too, like you say.
Yeah. Well, and if you don't like yoga, you can always walk and just put your phone away and be mindful. One tip that Deepak Chopra said is just take a look around, find 5 things to see, 5 things to smell, 5 things. Just, being mindful, being in the present moment, which we could all get better at. I want to give a chance now to let people know if this is of interest to you. I hope it's empowering you. But if you have some more concerns and you want help, you all have a 24/7 helpline at the Alzheimer's Association. That number is 1-800. It's on your screen right now, 1-800-272-3900. For our podcast listeners, I'm going to repeat that because you won't see it in the car or wherever you're listening, 1-800-272-3900, or just go to alz.org/CT. Follow them on social media at AlzCT. So you do have people who are there nonstop to just, answer some questions.
Any question you have, Kara, if you have a question about, hey, this is a weird thing that happened to my mom, is this something to worry about? To, can I get a neurologist in New Haven? To, I think that we've got a dementia diagnosis. I need to sit down with somebody and talk about what the plan is for my family. There's all sorts of different things. Plus we have also, like I mentioned, classes, free classes, support groups. Definitely get support. just know that there are so many people, thousands and thousands in Connecticut, who've already been at the stage that you're at, and we're all willing to share and listen, just to know that you're not alone. That's the whole point, I think. Know that caregivers and families are not alone. We're here for them.
Yeah. And plus the ways to hopefully prevent it so you don't even end up with this issue. So exciting times and new research. So thank you so much, Kristen Cusato, for being with us and sharing some important information about how to train our brain and keep us fit for 2022.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kara. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And this is an episode of CURES Cures. You can find more of the CURES Cures right in the WFSB streaming news app. Lots of topics to keep your interest about wellness. You can also follow me on social media at Kara Sundlin. I post them there. Be well, everyone.